Thank you so much, Holger, Michael, Wolfgang, everybody from EIKE. I have to say I noted with great appreciation that Holger said I'm one of the leading figures, at least that was the English interpretation, that I'm one of the leading figures at the Heartland Institute. So since 2001, I have been working on and essentially overseeing our climate change programs. And early last year, in 2020, I was named president. However, given the record, thank you for that applause, given the record of American presidents during the past 10 months, Holger diplomatically left that out, and for good reason. If you're an American and you claim to be president, people are going to look at you and say, Joe Biden, I don't know about that. So thank you for being so diplomatic there, Holger. I have to say, working with EIKE is something that has brought me great pleasure. It's been something that the Heartland Institute has taken great pride in. In the United States, approximately half of Americans do not buy into the so-called climate crisis. Here in Europe and in Germany also, it appears to me that there are far fewer people who have a healthy skepticism of the asserted crisis. And if not for groups like EIKE, like Clintel, like the Global Warming Policy Foundation, etc., truth would be lost entirely because the media do not report all sides of the issue. And if you already have the media flooding people's minds with just one-sided propaganda, the schools flooding people's minds the same way, and if there are no groups like EIKE, the cause is lost. But EIKE exists, and the cause is not lost. In fact, it is being won. So Holger asked me to talk today about the situation in the United States. But before I do that, I'd like to talk about the situation in Glasgow. As most everyone in the room likely knows, the United Nations is holding its annual Conference of the Parties on climate change. So the Heartland Institute, last week, we hosted our own Climate Reality Forum in Glasgow at the same location, at the same time as the United Nations event. We do this to present the truth that the UN is not presenting, and we live cast it on the internet all over the world. And the UN conference, they say, will be wrapping up today. If you would like to save yourself some time and not have to read all of the news accounts and filter through the truth from the propaganda, 4 words tell you all you need to know. Those folks are hypocrites. That's all there is. You're hypocrites. Everybody at that climate conference. Okay, let's break it down. When the United Nations announced that they were hosting their climate conference in Glasgow, they booked up all the rooms, all the hotel rooms available in Glasgow. So we at the Heartland Institute, the very same day that Glasgow was announced as the location, we tried to get hotel rooms for our event. We couldn't get any. We had to go to Edinburgh, which is about an hour train ride away, to find hotel rooms. Now, as it turned out, we didn't mind too much because, well, Edinburgh is a nicer place to visit and to stay than Glasgow. Glasgow's very urban and it's a fine city, but Edinburgh has all the history of ancient Scotland. So we were happy to be there. And when my plane landed at the Edinburgh airport, as my taxi driver picked me up, as we started leaving and we're driving by the runways, she pointed and says, "There's your president's plane." And I looked, and sure enough, there's Air Force One. Joe Biden flew into Edinburgh. And then there's another official American plane because you needed more than one plane to fly in Joe Biden, his entourage, all the SUVs and vehicles he'd be driving around. And I said, "Wait a second, why is he here?" And she said, "Oh, your president wanted to stay at an estate here outside Edinburgh." So rather than flying to Glasgow and having a short trip to the summit, Joe Biden, while lecturing all of us about our carbon dioxide emissions, while talking about a climate crisis that the world is being destroyed by, decides to fly into Edinburgh so that he can have his whole caravan going back and forth, because I didn't see them on the train that I was on. They'd take all their SUVs and drive approximately 60 miles, I don't know, over 100 kilometers, back and forth each day so that Joe can stay in a country estate. And it wasn't just Joe Biden. John Kerry, our American climate czar, he felt he needed to attend, but, well, flying on the same plane with Joe was a little too inconvenient. So John Kerry flew his own personal jet at taxpayer expense and at carbon dioxide emissions expense to Edinburgh and Glasgow. And then Nancy Pelosi wanted to attend, so she flew out as well. Again, we're all talking separate jets. This has become the largest carbon dioxide or super spreader event in world history. You are all hypocrites. On top of that, 30,000 people. We were initially told 30,000 people. Then we were told it had grown to 50,000. Then we were told it grew to 100,000 people. Activists, climate activists flew in from all over the world. Are you kidding me? 100,000 people spreading their carbon dioxide to go out there and tell us something they could have done via Zoom. In fact, the whole conference could have been done via Zoom. This is nothing more than greenwashing and hypocrisy. Now, it's interesting, the news reports, and I saw it on the streets because I was there each day, are that these climate activist groups who sent their 100,000 people to Glasgow are very unhappy with the delegates for the United Nations. In the words of Greta Thunberg, blah, blah, blah. She also participated in a chant, "Take your climate crisis and shove it up your arse." That's literally what she was chanting. And the frustration is there because this is amazing. After Paris, in which we were told the world had been saved, now we're told that there is only one nation in the entire world that's meeting their climate targets from Paris. That's Gambia in Africa. By the way, you have to be really screwing things up if you're not meeting your targets when 3/4 of the world doesn't even have any targets. It's just the Western democracies. But nevertheless, so we have one nation that we're told is meeting the targets. That's it. At the same time, China, which is under no restrictions, is building a new coal power plant every week. In fact, China is adding more coal power than all of the rest of the world combined. In fact, China is adding 3 times as much coal power every year as the rest of the world combined. And what's the focus of the Glasgow Climate Conference? The focus is how terrible it is that Western democracies in Europe and the United States are not doing more to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. Folks, you are all hypocrites. So let me talk about the United States, which I was asked to do. The message from the United States is climate realists, like the folks in this room. Let me tell you, the good news is, in the United States at least, we are winning. We have right now a Democratic president, Democratic Party president. The Democratic Party is the party that is pushing the climate alarm. We have a Democratic president. We have a Democratic Senate. We have a Democratic House of Representatives. All of the levers of government are run by Democrats. And yet they cannot and have not passed a single piece of legislation that meaningfully restricts carbon dioxide emissions. In fact, not only have they done nothing in that regard, when the bills come up, you have Democrats that are blocking it in Congress because they know that their constituents, the American people, will rebel and vote them out of office. There will not be any meaningful carbon dioxide restrictions, thank goodness, passed before our next elections. And in our next elections, the Democrats are going to be wiped out. The good news from America is that despite one-sided media coverage, Despite one-sided propaganda in our schools, despite the entire climate establishment and their billions and billions and billions of dollars funding climate activism, they are accomplishing nothing. Thank goodness. Just a couple points before I turn it over to our scientist presenters. If I could deliver one message that I want you to take away from my talk here today regarding what is the reality, what is climate realism, what is our central message, what's most important to remember, it's this. You cannot have a global warming crisis if temperatures are abnormally cool. We know, scientists have long known that 1,000 years ago, during the medieval warm period, temperatures were warmer than they are today. Scientists have long known, it's not in dispute, that 2,000 years ago, during the Roman warm period, temperatures were warmer than they are today. Scientists have long known that if you go back even further, during the Holocene climate optimism, it lasted between 4,000 and 8,000 years ago. During that entire stretch of time, temperatures were substantially warmer than today. Throughout most of the time that human civilization has existed, temperatures have been significantly warmer than today. How can you have a global warming crisis when temperatures are unusually cool? People need to know this. If we know this and realize this, we realize we cannot be experiencing a global warming crisis. Indeed, to the extent that temperatures have been rising during the past century and a half, to whatever extent humans are influencing it, it really doesn't matter. Temperatures are rising at merely half the pace that was predicted by the United Nations. Temperatures could keep warming at this pace for another couple centuries at the least before we reach the temperatures during those time periods I mentioned, especially during the Holocene climate optimum. We're not conducting some grand experiment. In fact, we are hopefully returning to normal. Even the United Nations, in their assessment reports, they note that they cannot find any global increase in hurricane frequency and severity, in tornado frequency and severity, in droughts, in floods, in wildfires, you name it. It's all speculative, agenda-driven predictions. But facts and evidence trump predictions. And for 30 years, they've been making these predictions, and for 30 years, they've been wrong. In the United States, the American people realize that, and because I think people are intelligent throughout the world, despite the one-sided propaganda, I am confident that that skepticism of the narrative, in fact, that climate realism, will spread throughout Europe and throughout the world. Moving forward, what can we do? I think the most important thing that we can do is realize that younger people are starving for truth and information. If we don't deliver our messaging to people in their teens and their 20s and 30s, they may never see the light because they have been subjected to propaganda throughout their education in the schools. It's why it's so important that you folks are here today, that EIKE exists and is doing what it's doing. By the way, let me tell you something. I'm going to digress for a moment. When I look out and see a full auditorium, it raises my spirits. I mean, it makes my heart just pound out. When people like you fill these auditoriums, the scientists who will be speaking today, the scientists who are out there throughout the United States and Europe and Asia and Africa, they're heartened, they're invigorated. Please continue doing what you're doing. Show up at these events. Show that you support climate realism. It makes a world of difference. It keeps spirits up and it keeps the torch of truth alive. But moving forward, let's make sure that we find ways to reach younger people. At the Heartland Institute, I have two younger people in their 20s who are focusing on energy, environment, and climate issues. We're producing short 3, 4, 5-minute snappy videos geared toward millennials, geared toward Gen Z. We also have just produced this year a book, Climate at a Glance for Teachers and Students. Very succinct, short summaries, 1 or 2 pages each, of the climate topics that they've been exposed to. So we have a page or 2 on hurricanes, a few bullet points that tell you what the real truth is, a short summary, and then a compelling graphic. Not in science talk, not that's going on for 30 pages and glazes over their eyes. These are the types of things that we need to keep thinking about doing and reaching out to young people. Trust me, the future for truth is bright, and it's being shown today by all of you here attending EIKE. Thank you very much.
So thank you, James. So you were running away, so you don't get your award. No gingerbread this year. But if you come back, you get it. So thank you very much. It's symbolizing a poster display. And so, thank you. Jetzt gibt es eine Überleitung von mir und dann können Sie froh sein, dann gibt es nämlich jemand viel Sympathischeres, der dann durch die Veranstaltung führt. Und das ist unsere alte Mitstreiterin, also langjährige Mitstreiterin, Entschuldigung. Hui, also jetzt gehe ich wirklich, versprochen. Frau Dr. Brigitte Pötter, die seit Jahren sehr professionell durch unsere Veranstaltung führt. Sehen Sie jetzt hier, kommt jetzt auf die Bühne und kündigt den nächsten Referenten an.